To quote one of my daughter's favorite movies, you should never, ever, ever, and I mean never use food-grade plastic for milking your animals or storing your raw milk. I'm going to tell you why and what other things you should be using instead. I'm Kelsey from roughandtumblefarmhouse.com, where every single week I share stories about farming, family food, and fortitude here on our 5-acre homestead in northern Minnesota. So the reason why I really wanted to create this video, and I also made a blog post about this too, is because I have seen so many places on Facebook and like the Facebook groups that are there for raw milk or milking cows or milk goats or whatever. And I've also seen even on YouTube people talking about using food grade plastic buckets for milking. I tend to be a pretty diplomatic person. I like to think that there are many different ways to look at something. There's a lot of different opinions you can have on things and different ways of trying things. But when it comes to this, I'm sorry, there is just a right and a wrong. And you should not be using food grade plastic buckets. And let's talk about why. So food grade plastic has a couple of problems, and it's fine if you want to use it for other things in your kitchen. Maybe you've got a buddy who works at a restaurant and so you can get a bunch of food grade buckets and you want to use them for other things in your kitchen. That's fabulous. But when it comes to things like raw milk, we really want to be intentional about the products we're using, because raw milk, it is perfectly safe if handled correctly. But just like any food, if you are putting it in situations where it has chances to get bacteria and other things in it, that's when you have situations where raw milk can be dangerous. So one of the first problems with food grade plastic is the fact that it is plastic. Even if it's food grade, plastic is not as sturdy as something like stainless steel, which we'll talk about. Plastic can more easily get scratched and it can get chipped and things like that, and is going to break down a lot faster. It's going to degrade. Even as a food safe plastic, it's not designed to be used over and over and over again. Typically, a lot of times those buckets you might be getting were designed to have pickles or whatever in it to get it from where it's manufactured to the restaurant. It's used at the restaurant and then it's disposed of. It's not something that's meant to be used over and over again. And when plastic does get little scrapes in it or dents and things like that, it's very, very difficult to get those little crevices cleaned out, and they are absolute breeding grounds for nasty bacteria. The other thing, kind of going along the same grain as not being able to clean out the little nooks and crannies, is plastic is very hard to get as clean as you can something like stainless steel or glass. So if you have ever made butter in your food processor or made something that has a lot of butter or cream in it in a plastic thing, and then you've tried to wash it afterwards, you know it's next to impossible to get all that kind of greasy, sort of buttery, fatty substance that comes from milk solids and milk fats, and those things really cling to plastic, and it's very, very hard to get them completely clean from plastic. Another problem with plastic is that even though it is solid, it is a breathable material, so it can absorb flavors from your refrigerator. It can absorb just kind of other off flavors, and your milk also is not going to stay good as long in plastic. So this is what you want to be milking in, is a stainless steel bucket. There is a reason why pretty much every restaurant kitchen in the world that's like a decent kitchen, it is all stainless steel in there. If you've ever been to a dairy farm, it is all stainless steel there as well. The bulk tanks are stainless steel. The milk pipes, the milk lines are all stainless steel, because stainless steel is a really superior metal and thing to use for handling raw milk. So stainless steel is very sturdy for one, which is excellent, a lot more sturdy than plastic because it is a metal. It is way less likely to get damaged just because it is sturdier. It can get scratches, but stainless steel has this really cool property. It's, I think, 10%, I want to say, double check the blog post on that number, but I think it's 10% comprised of something called chromium, which when it's exposed to oxygen makes kind of a makes you think of like an egg bloom over eggs. So it's like a bit of a protective coating that comes around it. And the really cool thing about stainless steel is if it gets scratched, that protective coating regenerates. Now, it's not an antibacterial coating. I know copper, I believe, has some like actual antibacterial things like in the metal, or antimicrobial. Stainless steel doesn't have that. So it is still really important that you are sanitizing your stainless steel in between uses, but it has that protective coating on it that you certainly are not going to have from plastic. Stainless steel is also incredibly smooth and easy to clean then as well. The surface does not have any, it doesn't absorb at all, it doesn't leach at all, unlike how plastic can absorb a little bit and can leach a little bit as well. You're not going to get that with stainless steel. Because of that, it is super duper easy to clean and sanitize versus the plastic I was talking about. Those milk fats, those milk solids can be really hard to get cleaned off thoroughly. With stainless steel, it comes off way easier, way more efficiently. With my stainless steel, I typically, if you rinse it in cold water, that actually helps release the milk fats first, and then wash it in piping hot water afterwards. So one thing to note too, there's a difference between galvanized steel and stainless steel. So stainless steel is what you want to use for your milk bucket. If you have a milk machine, chances are good that it came with a stainless steel milk bucket as well. They have these in just about every size. We've got bigger ones for cows. This is just a standard for our Nubian goats. They have even smaller ones if you have little Nigerian dwarfs or something like that. It's not very expensive. I believe this bucket was $11. So it's not that much to invest in. A strainer for straining your milk is going to be a little more expensive. I talk about this more in a blog post and video I have all about equipment that you want to use for a small scale dairy operation or a homestead dairy. Now, going back, as I was saying, there's a difference between stainless steel and galvanized steel. This is the only easy example I had of galvanized steel on hand, is this little succulent planter, which I have yet to plant. But so this is a galvanized steel, so you can really see the difference. So they're made differently. So we have some like feed buckets and things that are made of a galvanized steel, and galvanized steel is very, very sturdy and very durable, and that's fine for feed buckets or even water buckets and your water troughs. Those are galvanized steel, not stainless steel, but so just pay attention. You can just see how this is not quite as shiny, that they are a different thing. So don't mistake those two. Now, glass is certainly just fine for putting your milk in. I mean, obviously you probably aren't going to use like a glass milk bucket, I can't imagine. But I have certainly before, when I'm training my new milk goats, will sometimes milk directly into just a quart glass mason jar. Those are great. Just make sure you're using glass that is intended for food use. I can't imagine what other sort of glass you would really, like an old candle jar. I don't know what other sort of like glass containers you might be using, but mason jars are just a really easy option there because they're pretty sturdy. Even if your goat does kick it out of your hand, it might not break if your barn floor isn't, concrete. But glass also does not scratch the way plastic does, and it also is very smooth and isn't going to absorb flavors and that sort of thing. A few other things I wanted to talk about quick is like your caps for your milk jars and things like that. So you do have these plastic mason jar lids that you can use for your milk. That's fine. That's not an issue. The milk isn't sitting in them. It's just sitting on top. But I will say with these, and then I also, because my husband really struggles to pour milk from a jar. He just can't master it. So I saw this little gadget. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. It fits on a wide mouth mason jar. We still use it for tea and things like that. But I noticed with this and with this, your milk is not going to stay fresh nearly as long. And I think it's again just because oxygen does absorb in through this plastic, which if you've ever done like long-term food storage sort of things, you know that you can't just stick food in those big plastic buckets. You got to stick it in the Mylar bags and all that stuff, because otherwise it's going to absorb your basement or cellar flavors, and it will still go rancid and stuff like that. So you can use these, but I think, boy, my milk will last 2 weeks or more and still be fresh without starting to sour if I just use the 2-piece metal lids. Versus these, it's less than a week. I notice the milk starts getting kind of sour. So you can use them. They're not my favorite. I also find that this in here, I don't know if you can kind of see, there's little ridges in here that I find are really hard to keep clean. And again, with raw milk, cleanliness is more than next to godliness. It's what you have to do, what you have to have. Two things I really want to address in terms of where you might see plastic or rubber in terms of handling raw milk, and it's fine along kind of with using those lids if you want to, is in cheese making. So if you have cheese molds, these are usually made out of a food safe plastic as well. That's not an issue though, because if you think about it, if you've ever made cheese, it is a highly sanitary process because you're wanting to make sure you really limit the exposure to other bacteria and things that are happening. So your cheese molds are very well sanitized, and then also your cheese usually goes in a cheesecloth, and on top of that, you've actually processed that milk. It's not just raw milk you have sitting in a cheese mold. You have introduced different cultures already into it and mixed them in and things like that. So that's why it's fine to be using plastic when it comes to making cheese, because it's, like I said, it's already sanitized, it already has a culture introduced, and it's not just hanging out directly in the plastic. One other place that you might see rubber, so kind of a plasticky thing when it comes to milking is if you have a milk machine, the claw, and I'll just kind of put a picture in here, the claw part has little rubber hoses attached, and then there are usually two hoses that attach back to your actual milk machine, one that the milk is flowing through and one that kind of the vacuum is operating through. It's pretty much the exact same setup almost if you've ever used a breast pump, very similar situation. These, again, they're okay because the milk isn't hanging out in them for very long. The milk is shooting through, and that's the only time it's really touching it. These are also food safe. They are made to be used for milking. They've been engineered for that. And lastly, they are replaced very frequently, usually every year or so at the most, sometimes 6 months. These parts are all swapped out before they even are able to start to break down. So there you have it. That is why you should not be using food grade plastic when it comes to handling your milk. And I know people might be telling you different on Facebook or wherever, and just good for you, not for me, is one of my favorite sayings sometimes. Like, I just don't do it. People oftentimes will say, oh, we've been milking into just plastic. I've seen people milk into just like plastic feed buckets and use it for consumption. And I'm just like, the whole time, like, please do not do that. It's the same thing to me, almost as saying like, when I cross the road, I only ever look one way. I don't check the other way and I just cross. It's like, and I haven't been hit by a car yet. It's like, okay, well, you've gotten lucky that you haven't gotten hit by a car, but if you just take that little extra thing, just look left, just milk into your stainless steel, you're going to be that much more safe, especially if, to go on with the analogy, you're crossing the road holding your kid's hand or your neighbor's hand or whoever else is drinking your raw milk. You really want to make sure that you are being safe with that milk because it is a slightly riskier food to be using, so just make sure you're doing so responsibly. So if you have any questions below, or if you want to tell me how you've been milking into some old pickle bucket for 40 years and never gotten sick, go ahead, I can take it, but please just handle your raw milk responsibly and enjoy it because it's wonderful. So just go get yourself some stainless steel. Also, disclaimer, I do not work for like big stainless steel or anything else like that. This is not a sponsored post. This is not some sort of conspiracy. It's the better choice. Stainless steel, or maybe if you're milking that goat when you're training it, directly into a glass jar, and then make sure that you're not using that same jar for storing your milk. Still filter it, put it in a clean jar that's only been in your kitchen, and wash up that Barney jar. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if this is a little bit of a rant, but some things get me a little heated, and it turns out raw milk safety is one of them. We'll catch you next week for more farming, family food, and fortitude here at our Rough and Tumble farmhouse.